Age of Empires IV has had its stress test almost 3 weeks ago now, and with this new first public look and playtime of the title, it seems like a good a time as any to go over what's changed, everything new that we can expect in the new game, and what we saw in the latest playable version. Less than half a month until its final release date, let's look at the best and worst new features of Age of Empires IV. On the build-up to the newest title in the Age of Empires franchise, there was a lot of speculation and to some extent skepticism. You see, the promotional material was focused on the background and the history of the game, showing cinematics and mini-documentaries around medieval history rather than actually talking about the game itself, leaving many red flags to some long-term fans. Yet, despite all the odds as it came out for public testing, the responses were incredibly positive, being called a worthy successor to the obvious predecessor, Age of Empires II. The game had fresh new graphic styles, controversial to some but adequate to others. There are a number of new changes, but perhaps not quite as many as I think fans expected. And this is because I think Relic have made the obvious decision to play it somewhat safe in this direction, for Age of Empires IV being more of a reboot than an incredibly different sequel. But the game itself starts way faster than most before, rushing to feudal ages sped up with a number of new mechanics to give the game's pace more apparent to something like Age of Mythology. Most civs start with more villagers, sometimes up to 6 rather than the base 3 that we saw in Age of Empires II. Because of this, you're going to see a greater increase of resources coming in from your settlers in this dark age. One of the newest starting mechanics are sheep scouting, letting the animal AI have a bit more of a mind of its own, tagging on and following your scout, that to some people may look as dumbing down the macro a little bit, but this is a conscious decision made by Relic that will be coming up multiple times with these new features affecting the game loop. Moving on, we have a not particularly new feature, as it was seen in things like Age of Mythology and Age of Empires 3, but something that I really love, and this is leveling up paths. It worked great in Age of Mythology, being able to choose a god of your choice to worship after each civilization upgrade, gaining the perks and buffs and units of that god because of your decision. This adds an extra level to dynamic choice and variation in the Age of Empires 4 matches, as even playing as the same faction will net a different type of match each time, depending on which of the two branches you pick every time your town progresses. As mentioned, this isn't necessarily a new feature, but as this is more of a sequel to Age of Empires 2, it's something that many people might not have experienced before. Staying in the early game, however, Age of Empires 4 once again moves towards a faster progression through the Dark Age with things like automatic farming, being able to place multiple farms at once when the mill is selected with the building at hand. Also sending villagers to tend the fields on their own, taking away some of that micromanaging you have to do at the very beginning. Unlike AoE II, that's it. You're done with farming. There's no micro needed. Just let them get on and you pretty much have an unlimited food source depending on how many farms you have. Reseeding the farm is no longer necessary and it will be done automatically by the mill. Whilst this did add some micro to early game, I think this is a very conscious change to match enjoyment for a more casual player, focusing on important things like trading, building armies and defenses to focus on those victory conditions rather than having to spend time queuing up 20 farm reseeds just to hold back the wave of that maraca sound effect due to crop exhaustion. And trust me, if this sound design doesn't prove that you can get PTSD from a game, I don't know what does. But we have covered the early game. The mid to later game is a massive focus on what most of your playtime will be, at least at a more casual level. In defensive play, one of the biggest changes are the placeable walls. Palisades are pretty similar to what we've seen in the past with Age of Empires 2, yet upgrading them to stone walls is where you can start taking advantage of some newly added mechanics. Being able to mount troops atop the crenellations, it looks epic and is one of my favourite additions to keep that medieval commander vibe going. Troops placed on the wall though also have effects on the stats and the skills of your men. They're going to take less damage from enemy attacks, being able to take some slight cover and getting a buff to prove. What's more, and perhaps the more useful reason for having these stone walls, is boosting the range for projectile troops such as archers and crossbows. The extra height gives the soldiers those few extra meters they need in order to win any ranged skirmish. I love this improvement, giving walls, at least in the late game, way more use. They also feel much more powerful overall, not just mechanically but visually, being an intimidatingly large profile on the battlefield. Age of Empires 2, whilst having walls, didn't provide that much for them to do during the late game, as a decent sized army could pretty much break through in no time, but you don't get that feeling in Age of Empires 4. Speaking of buildings, other placements have areas of influence now, giving buffs and effects to certain units within their zone. Things like healing troops that are around a cathedral, buffing them, giving them better stats, or even letting the buildings produce faster that are within their capture zone. Despite this, the knock-on effect to gameplay is somewhat greater than you might think at first glance. These areas of influence are limited, meaning that any placement that want to receive buffs need to be strategically placed in the encompassing area, trying to get as many structures in it to maximize the number of buffs given. But to war we go, and in it the troops and units do kind of feel pretty similar overall. Archers, infantry, spears and cavalry fight using that rock, paper, scissors mechanic that we've seen in nearly every other predecessor. Unique units are mixed throughout, yet during the stress test with limited factions, getting a good picture on every variation of unique unit wasn't the easiest thing to do. Artillery, however, is a fantastic new addition for the medieval world. Granted, this is something that we saw being a massive staple in Age of Empires III battles, yet when it comes to the medieval setting, of course it wasn't really used as much, as in AoE II you had things like bombarded cannons and a tower or two, but the gunpowder level artillery was very much at the back seat there. Age of Empires IV, however, has some great variety when it comes to gunpowder weapons. Cannons feel powerful and giving a solid backbone to any sieging army, using many of the mechanics that we saw in Age of Empires III's artillery, being a suitable counter to the stronger walls that I mentioned within the new title. Yet, as we move to the end game, we see something new when it comes to win conditions. Of course, domination, taking out notable buildings, relics and wonders are back from before, but now we have things called sacred sites, multiple locations within the map that must be captured by monks. These have to be held for 10 minutes before victory, and it is a great counter to your defensive enemy. You know, the players that wall up and stack as many in their city to make it impenetrable. Well, now you can force them to come out and leave. So we've seen some fantastic additions. As I mentioned, perhaps not as many as some people would like to have seen advancing the franchise, but Relic are definitely playing it safe here, which perhaps is a good idea at this point. If you want to go and see in depth about every detail and all the unit statistics, there's no better YouTuber than Spirit of the Law for that stuff. That guy takes AoE to the next level, my god. But it's not all perfect. The stress test is here for a reason, to get feedback from the community and, as the name suggests, push the multiplayer to its limits to smooth out any of the bumps in gameplay. But hey, this video isn't just about the best, but also some of the things that AoE IV introduces or carries over that I, at least personally, don't think are ideal. First of all, population. This was a big talking point during the stress test. Having just a 200-man pop cap is kind of disappointing for me. Even Age of Empires II Definitive pushed the game to 500 men, so it kind of feels strange that they revert back to the 200 people per player. However, part of me hopes that this is just a side effect of it being a stress test, that eventually that it will go up to something like 500 troops, but as the earliest public version, Relic wanted to be safe. Keep it down to that 200 in case of a complete disaster. So this isn't a be-all or end-all for me. Additionally, I'm not a massive fan of the current UI. Age of Empires 2 felt well crafted, mechanically but also visually. The UI fit perfect for the time period. The menus were scrolls and wreaths, surrounding your game to immerse yourself within that medieval match. Age of Empires 4, however, the UI feels a little bit tacked on. I don't hate it, it's not disgusting, it does the job, but it just feels a little bit generic. You know, gradient overlaid buttons for players to click that have more function than beauty. This is something that can easily change in the future, and as I mentioned, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not special. It could do with more. I like flair, I like style, and currently the UI I don't think quite has that. But there's one more big reoccurring factor that Relic has added into this new title, and that I think is going to be quite polarizing for some people. Age of Empires 4 is definitely focused less towards micromanaged matches. You know, when you're watching competitive players for Age of Empires 2 and they're doing things like moving individual villagers, baiting warhogs while sending clubmen to go and annoy the enemy all at the same time? Well, I don't think Age of Empires 4 is going to focus on that in the same way. Things like auto farming, sheep scouting, less strategy and actual skirmishes, like micromanaging troops to dodge arrows, these things have all been changed to help new players. Relic seems to want to head in a direction that gives newer fans to the franchise a chance to jump in here, especially with things like hotkeys being a little bit dumbed down compared to Age of Empires 2. It really looks like that's the way they're going. Now, is it enough to annoy a veteran Age of Empires 4 player? I don't think so. I think there's still definitely enough unique micromanagement there that you can really get your hands on, but it definitely does head towards that reboot vibe more than a new sequel in the franchise, and for a new audience it seems like a safe direction to go. I am putting it as a negative, as I think many older players could be annoyed by the less micromanaged matches, but it is really just a matter of preference. I think accessibility is great for reintroducing people to the franchise, as there hasn't been a new game in over a decade, but I do worry if there are more sequels and we carry on going down this more dumbed down trajectory, it could get to the point where older players don't connect to the game in the same way. But overall, Age of Empires 4 has been an incredible first impressions, at least for me. Whilst playing it safe, I think that's understandable, and it gives just enough to tempt older fans back and get something new out of it. With this, I can't wait to see what else we're introduced with upon the full release at the end of this month. But tell me, what are your favourite new additions to the game? Is there anything that they've changed that you're maybe not so much of a fan of? Let me know down below. But leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, leave a dislike if you didn't. But until then, I will see you in the next one.